Hello, Vermonters, and thanks for sharing some of your time to learn what I want to share with you, which is about an invasion against Vermont. And some would say, oh, that's extremist and that's so crazy. So, as an attorney and a Vermonter, I'd like to try to make my case. And in an article recently on True North Reports titled Vermonters Must Defend Their Culture, about a week ago, I wrote about this. So, if you want to read the full article. And I quote here Kaya Morris. Kaya Morris was a representative here in Vermont, apparently so reviled for her race that people elected her into office. But she really puts Vermonters down a lot. She's from Chicago originally, has a master's degree, I think, in gender studies. And she has written, unless you are Vermont, are First Nations, you have no right to claim who are real Vermonters. Nativist political platforms are the basest level of discourse. And yet, Kaya Morris and others invoke an African nativism as their calling or culture, even though they've never been here and it's thousands of miles away, or an Abenaki culture that was long extinct before the vast majority of Vermonters arrived here hundreds of years ago. And so there's this attack on Vermont nativism, Vermont culture. Susanna Davis, who's from New York City and answered an ad in the paper to come here and be the director of racial equity, is from New York City, comes from a different culture, an urban culture, and yet comes here and now gets paid a lot of money to preach to us about who is a real Vermonter and what Vermont's culture is and why we should have more tourism ads featuring black people in them and how horrible it is that we're still 95% white and how our dairy industry is beholden to immigrants, illegal or not, and the other way around, running down family farms, climate warriors yelling at our state house that the climate's being destroyed by dairy farms, attacks on our parental rights in our schools teaching that children should feel bad for their history in Vermont, not because abolitionism was bad, because it's ignored, but that somehow Vermonters embraced slavery and that its constitution wasn't good enough. This is a cultural attack by urbanites who are carpetbaggers, who are really colonizers. And so that's why we call them flatlanders. Oh, heaven forbid you call them flatlanders, because then you're attacking people, but they're attacking Vermonters, and it's out in the open now. It's right here in the articles I write. But this is what the plan was. The plan was to colonize Vermont. I will share with you the proof of that allegation. And first, let's look at the recent report in 2021, the report of the Vermont Racial Equity Task Force, in which they proposed that all candidates for office in Vermont take a pledge denouncing hate and Vermont nativism for all candidates for elected office. Now, this Vermont Racial Equity Task Force, though, is comprised of people like Cleophas Kayandamina Mukiba, Maria Mercedes Avila, and Witchy R2. None of them are Vermont natives. I don't know. They come from different cultures than ours, but they're called stakeholders. So they're going to decide as immigrant people that are not from here what Vermont should be and what we are. And it's really bizarre. But imagine how Abenaki or how African Zulus felt, or Oglala Sioux, when white men set up councils to condemn their backward ways. This is out of my article. Indoctrinate them in civilized knowledge like equity and social justice, and take over their lands to impose equity. Those colonizers lacked the audacity to proclaim that they were community representatives, though they are part of the same community of racists to which both groups belong. I'll show you a little bit more of how much this is a very deliberate action. In another article I published some time ago, a couple of years ago, on American Thinker, I quote from a 1972 article, and I have that article here. And in this 1972 article that was published on Playboy magazine called Taking Over Vermont, they write this: the goal of this takeover, and this is after a plan of how people that were extremists and extreme social progressives could have a new frontier. Literally, they use that phrase in Vermont, where they could go and take over the local rural communities. And then the goal of this takeover, quote, would be to establish a truly experimental society to which new solutions to today's problems could be tried, an experimental state which would serve as a new frontier and encourage imaginative local innovation and by its example, spur change to society as a whole. We're watching that happen with the climate change and other social justice activism here in Vermont, sponsored by out-of-state lawsuits and out-of-state money on a huge scale. But of course, this article warned that it might fail if the people that were locals rose up against it and decided to oppose them. But here's another example from an article that I quote in my article in True North Reports, where they boast about it. This is a book out called Going Up the Country, and it's basically a guide about how to go to take over rural, red or conservative areas with new progressivism. And they use an example, Ben and Jerry's. Entrepreneurship, hippie style, has paid off big time for the creators of local brands like Ben and Jerry's, sold in 2000 to Unilever, and Jogbra, sold 10 years earlier to Playtex Corp. The Brooklyn-born ice cream magnates Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield helped found Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility, the largest and oldest state group of its kind with more than 750 members in 640 companies. However, as the newcomers to Vermont profiled by Daily learned, sooner or later, getting involved in local politics remains one of the most effective ways to link national and international issues to rural community concerns. In 2008 and beyond, anyone planning to do short-term campaigning or long-term colonizing in any present-day red states should first consult the book Going Up the Country. So this is a deliberate plan to take us over. And if you protest, like John Rogers or others, that you're being invaded by people who want to take over and convert your culture, then you are, of course, attacked, just like any Indians on the reservation who question the wisdom of the white man or the Catholic Church, which were going to come in and use missions to civilize the locals. This is what we've been experiencing actually for a long time before Kaya and Susanna showed up. And so I will ask you, Vermonters, to say we've had enough and we're not going to take it anymore. We're proud of our culture. We're a wonderful culture. We've always been very accepting of people. And this invasive culture is the opposite of that. And as we see graffiti sprayed all over the buildings in Burlington, in just rates that's so high they can't even paint it over, and destroying the businesses and that community and that culture. And we see graffiti painted literally on our local covered bridges like it's so cool to be inner city and ghetto. Then maybe what I'm expecting to be attacked for is I say they're importing an urban culture. Susanna Davis and Kaya Morris come from urban cultures. George Floyd was from an urban culture. And these people then invoke and really involve in our statutes like H210 urban statistics from the nation to say that Vermont is racist somehow because Chicago has problems with disparity and other rates. This is all an ideological, race-based, racist abuse. But ultimately, and most importantly, people need to understand it's an attack on Vermonters and on our culture. And we have to respond with tolerance because that's what we always have been. And that's exactly what they abuse. So maybe it's time that the Vermont natives were stakeholders. And that Vermont natives, Vermont people, wherever you're born, people who embrace our culture of inclusivity and self-reliance, and supporting our local farms instead of attacking them, supporting local families and the liberty and freedom of people to raise their children the way they wish. Those are our values. That's our culture. That's what we're standing up for. And so I ask you to keep reading my articles and share this video and others so that people can learn the truth, that there really is a very deliberate and very dark and kind of hateful invasion going on against Vermont. And it's okay to be a native, because I don't have any other culture to go to. Thanks very much for listening.